Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Wednesday webinar series, Lunch with the Birds. My name is Amanda Duran, and I'm the Program Coordinator for the Ohio Bird Conservation Initiative. I'd like to welcome you to our Wednesday webinar series today. If you are attending for the first time, or welcome you back if you've joined us for a presentation before. I would like to let everyone know that all of our webinars are recorded and are archived both on our website, which is obcinet.org, as well as our YouTube channel, and you can see that address at the top of your screen. And if anyone missed last month's webinar, which was on keeping cats indoors by Grant Sizemore of the American Bird Conservancy, that webinar has been posted. So I invite you to take a look at that recording on our website. And normally this is the point in our introduction where I let you know about our upcoming webinars for the next month, but unfortunately I need to let you know that we will be taking a break from our series. I have accepted another position with the American Bird Conservancy in Pennsylvania, so I will be leaving the Ohio Bird Conservation Initiative at the end of this month. So there are plans to rehire for my position, but we don't have a timeline on that as of yet. So there will be a break in the series until the new program coordinator is brought on. I'm the only paid staff member for OBCI, so we are pretty limited on our staff. But in the meantime, please visit our website and watch some of the archived webinars, more than 24 of those that we've done in the past, and hopefully that'll tide you over until we begin our series again with a new coordinator. Today's webinar is presented to you by the Nature Conservancy, and I would invite you to check out a lot of the great work that the Nature Conservancy is doing, especially in Ohio, at nature.org. So with that, I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Jennifer Ellsworth. Jennifer has worked for 8 years at the Metropolitan Park District of the Toledo area in various positions. Currently, she holds the position of Heritage Corridor Supervisor. She also serves as a Regional Director for the Environmental Education Council of Ohio. Jennifer has a BS in Environmental Science from Lake Erie College and a Master's in Geosciences from Mississippi State University. She's an Ohio native and spent most of her childhood flipping logs and catching toads, which many of us can relate to, I'm sure. Naturally, her professional career focuses on working to provide a variety of educational programs, workshops, conferences, and publications focused on Ohio wildlife, ecology and biology, natural history, habitat management, and sustainability. Through this work, she finds it especially rewarding bringing the non-nature person into the park and inspiring them to preservation. In her personal life, she enjoys spending time with her family, which includes her husband, her 2-month-old son, a pony, 3 dogs, and 2 rabbits. So with that, I'm going to be turning the presentation over to Jennifer. And I'd like to remind everyone that we will be accepting, of course, questions from everyone throughout the webinar. However, we will be holding those questions until the end. So feel free to enter them as you think of them in the chat box, and especially if you have any issues or problems, feel free to send those my way as well. But I will be holding the questions for Jennifer until the end. And again, I remind you to close any other browser windows or file sharing programs you might have open to help improve the quality of your experience in our webinar. But thanks for joining us today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jennifer.
All right. Thank you very much, Amanda. As Amanda kind of described in my introduction, I kind of hold a few different hats here at the Metroparks, and it's always kind of an ever-changing challenge to figure out what each day is going to have in store for me, which of course means I never get bored. A lot of folks that I work with were somewhat surprised when I mentioned I was doing a birding webinar, because I don't claim to be much of a birder by any means. There's a lot of other folks within the organization that are definitely a lot better at birding, I guess I should say, than myself. But I should also preface this presentation by letting you know that I'm a former summer camp counselor, and consequently there'll be a few stories kind of interwoven into the presentation today. And I guess what gave me an interest in doing this was that I've had a lot of personal experiences with wild turkeys, in particular, for one reason or another. So I guess that's what kind of interested me in being able to share this with you folks. And of course, it's an appropriate time of year where a lot of folks are thinking about turkeys. whether it be the wild sort or the domestic type that may end up on your table at Thanksgiving. So I guess I just want to kind of start off a little bit into what the, I guess, sort of format of this webinar is going to be. So just a little bit of a preview there. So our division at the Metroparks that I work within is actually divided up into 3 different departments. So I work under the park interpretation and do a little bit with environmental education and outdoor recreation as well. And I've kind of interwoven those 3 parts within our presentation for today. So I'll kind of start off with a little bit on life history of the wild turkey, some specific characteristics to it, and move on into a little bit on environmental education, knowing that not everybody's necessarily an educator that's with us today, but there are some what I like to call stupid naturalist tricks that could be, you know, particularly interesting even to those who aren't maybe teaching or leading programming. And then also, as far as outdoor recreation goes, a little bit on turkey hunting and some of the remediation efforts that have gone into making the turkey more plentiful in the Ohio area, most specifically. So the picture that's actually in the middle here was a picture I stumbled upon fairly recently. Lauren McCafferty actually presented one of these webinars a little while back, and she had this picture, passed it around to a few folks within the organization, and I said, hey, that would actually be perfect for a webinar I'm doing. Can I borrow that? So give her credit there for being in a good place at a good time to get a pretty good picture there of some wild turkey that are within one of our metro parks. I'll touch on this a little bit later, but one of the exciting things about wild turkeys and their comeback is the fact that we're not just seeing them in wilderness areas, so to speak, but this particular park, Wildwood Preserve, where they're seen, is situated in a pretty populated area. So they're making their way in, they're opportunists, and they're in areas where there's quite a few folks right in the city. There was even a video I pulled up where there is Northeast Ohio, I believe it was. There's a wild turkey that had taken up a home in a residential neighborhood and liked to sit on people's cars and poke fun at them as they all walked by, making some of its interesting vocalizations. So I wanted to start off a little bit on some life history with the wild turkey. So wild turkey, they once inhabited forested areas in every county of Ohio, which was a good thing at that point because they were an important food source for the early settlers. As those forested areas became more and more sparse, and of course there wasn't a whole lot in the way of hunting regulations at that point, by 1904 the wild turkey was actually extirpated from Ohio. Looking ahead then to 1950, by this point, many large tracts of forested land had returned in southeastern Ohio, specifically. And from 1952 to 1957, the Division of Wildlife actually reared somewhere around 1,400 game farm turkeys and then released them in several of those southeastern forests in an attempt to establish a new turkey population. That initial effort actually failed, and from 1956 to 1963, they turned to trapping wild turkeys in a number of different states: West Virginia, Kentucky, Texas, Alabama, Arkansas, Missouri, and Florida were actually all places. And they took those turkeys, transplanted them to Ohio, and in state trapping and transplanting of these wild turkeys, conducted from 1963 all the way up to 2006, they started to become more successful. I've actually found a few varying numbers on this, but I think this is probably one of the more accurate statistics for our purposes. But according to the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, by the spring of 2008, Ohio's wild turkey population was estimated to number about 200,000 birds. So once again today, wild turkeys are present in all of Ohio. Like I mentioned, storytelling is one of the ways that I try to hopefully teach folks about a number of different subjects. So you're getting into one of my stories right now. For about 3 years, I actually lived on a 5-acre parcel of parkland that was not yet open to the public, that belonged to the Metroparks of the Toledo area. In passing, while I lived there, I would notice looking out my window that there were wild turkeys kind of roaming about. And I happened to mention this to somebody at work, and turns out the fellow doing the outdoors page for the Toledo Blade at that point in time was actually in the process of writing a piece on wild turkeys, and had found it particularly interesting that wild turkeys had officially taken up residence within Toledo city limits, because I guess that wasn't known at that point. And this was back in 2010 that this was going on. Prior to actually moving over to Toledo, I'm actually a northeastern Ohio native, more specifically, and I did spend a few years living within the Cuyahoga Valley National Park. So to me, it didn't seem, living on a 5-acre parcel, I kind of forgot sometimes that I actually was in the city. So it didn't seem to me too unusual to be seeing these turkeys, roaming about. So I hadn't thought much of it, but ended up being quoted in the paper at that point. So I did manage to actually find the article from 2010 and the quote specifically, where apparently I said, I have seen a single turkey 3 times at the Belt, which is the name of the Metroparks property initially. It'll actually be opening soon to the public as Brookwood. So if some of you are on this webinar from the Toledo area, you might be a bit familiar with that terminology. The first time, going back to the article here, the first time would have been at some point in May, the second time in maybe June, and most recently on September 11th in the late afternoon. She said the bird is flighty, unlike the deer that frequent the property. And just a bit more from that article, Skip Markland, the regional director of the National Wild Turkey Federation at that point, mentioned this is a great testimony to the cooperative work between the Ohio Division of Wildlife, the National Wild Turkey Federation, and more importantly, all of the hunters and fishermen who purchased annual licenses, who have helped pay for this wildlife comeback, he said. Turkey biologist Reynolds once noted that his records indicate that more than 5,100 turkeys have been restocked in 85 of Ohio's 88 counties, and all but 153 of those birds were captured and released. On January 18th, year 2000, 7 jakes, which are immature males, 10 adult hens, and 8 juvenile hens were released in the Oak Openings Preserve Metro Park, which is one of our largest parcels of land that Metropolitan Park District of the Toledo area owns. And just within Lucas County, which is, in my mind, a fairly small county when you're looking at all the counties, especially when you consider the open space to the space that is, I guess, a little bit more densely populated. So you may not be familiar with all these cities, but Swanton, Providence, Waterville, Monclova, Springfield, Harding, Spencer, and Sylvania townships were all areas within there, within those limits that were seeing these turkeys that had been released. Since the writing of that newspaper article, I did see turkeys up to 4 at a time, generally during the rainy weather, which I'll get on a little bit further into the presentation about a myth that's associated with turkeys and rain. Some of you folks might be familiar with that. So that's a little bit on life history. Moving into what they look like. Let's see if I can get this to zoom a little bit better. Maybe not. Starting first of all off at size there. Do it this way. as far as size goes, they're pretty large. Actually, the largest upland game bird in our state. They measure around 3 to 4 feet tall, weigh up to 24 pounds. Size difference is typical between the males and females. Males will typically be in the 8 to 24 pound range, while females will weigh in smaller at 7 to 16 pounds. Males have a wingspan of about 42 to 28 inches, and females about 34 to 49 inches. Looking then at their overall length, it's about 43 to 45 inches. If you want to put that into relative terms, they are smaller than a trumpeter swan and about twice the size and 4 times as heavy as a ring-necked pheasant. As far as their build goes, they've got a slim body, long neck, and a bald-looking head. From a distance, which in general is probably the best look that you'll get at them if you're looking at them in a more wild setting, they appear to be just a plain old brown color. Now, if you do get lucky enough to get a bit closer look at them, or if you find any remnant feathers left behind, you'll notice there's a bit of an iridescence actually to them, and some real nice bronze, red, green, copper, and gold colors even. Their tail is large and once again colored brown with black tips. And I do have a few pictures here that we can zoom in on to kind of differentiate a little bit more between the males and females. The adult males, called gobblers, are going to have a reddish head, a tasseled beard, and black-tipped breast feathers and spurs on the legs. Females, called the hens, are going to have more of a bluish-colored head, usually no beard, and buff-tipped breast feathers. And I've actually found conflicting information one more time. Generally, they won't have the spurs that the males have. In some places I've read they might have a little bit of a spur, but not generally 1/2 inch or more like the males will have. So a little bit bigger view in the nice drawing here that I've gotten from ODNR. Long tasseled beard, black breast, and tips there on these feathers versus the hen. So if we do a little bit of a post test, and I go back to this picture over here, looking at the turkeys that are in here, based on what we've looked at, are they hens or are they gobblers? So from what you can hopefully make out within this picture, I don't see too many characteristics there of the male gobblers, so we'll go with the hens there on that slide. Now we did test this out before. There's a few links that I have within here, and allaboutbirds.org from Cornell University actually has a lot of nice resources, and one of those is actually some turkey sounds. And when we had tried this out before with the instrument I'm using to talk to you folks, I was able to actually get a pretty good sound coming through to give you a little bit of a preview on some of the different vocalizations that they make. The adult males, called gobblers, will make an assortment of vocalizations. Descriptive-wise, they can be described as purrs, trills, croaks, whines, even barks. At the beginning of the presentation, I had titled it with some of those different sounds that they make. I honestly, and I'll get into it a little bit later, I had a personal experience listening to some of these sounds, and to me they all kind of sounded the same. I think because I was a little bit startled in that situation. It didn't really occur to me until putting together this presentation that they had so many different variations actually in the sounds that they make. The gobble which is how the males got their name, is kind of the equivalent of a rooster crow. It's often used when they're situated at the top of their tree roost, and it carries better and further when they're up there. So I'll go ahead and hopefully that was audible to most of you. And since this is up on the screen too, if you go back to the recording, you'll be able to have the URL and everything to go listen to these as well at your leisure, of course. Gobble is also used to attract females and in response to other males. Both genders will make a kind of cackling sound when they're descending from their tree roosts, and then a soft purring sound can also be heard when they're traveling as a group on foot. So we'll go ahead and play that one there. There's also a yelping sound that can be heard that's in an effort to bring back together a scattered flock. And I think there was one more on here, the hiss here, that I'll try and get to play for you. Now, as I alluded to, I did have a personal experience with a group of wild turkeys at one point that startled me a bit. One of my other jobs was working for Nature's Classroom just outside of Columbus, Ohio. And in that position, I taught nature interpretation and outdoor survival skills and math and physics, team building, social studies, all sorts of good things, just using nature as a backdrop for that. And general audience was K through 4th graders that participated in a 3-day, 2-night residential program. One of my days off there, I took some time to wander into one of our upland forested areas. And the reason for that is because I was looking for a good venue to do a wilderness survival program, and that I was going to be teaching later in the week. And to kind of set the scene for what was about to happen next, it was mid-afternoon, a bit dark, a little dreary, a little bit of drizzle kind of percolating through the air. And I believe it was sometime in March, might have been closer to April at that point. And some of my coworkers were out and about as well, and as I'm wandering through the woods, I hear a bit of a soft murmur of voices, which ended up being that purring sort of call that I played for you on the Cornell website, and didn't really associate that with an animal. Thought it was more of my coworkers maybe in the woods. Also, I should let you know I was pretty well convinced that the site was haunted there, because there'd been a lot of interesting series of events that had gone on. So that also kind of explains a little bit in regards to my apprehension when I started hearing these noises. Soft murmuring, though, kind of turned into more of a soft, continuous call, resembling some sort of a bird. So that's when I kind of figured out it was something of the bird variety as opposed to my coworkers. And as I followed and got a little bit closer, I noticed 3 large birds just standing kind of above me on a leafy covered knoll. So my first thought was, oh, hey, neat, turkeys. My second thought was, good grief, these guys are pretty big. I started thinking, you know, if they all stood on top of each other, they'd be about 12 feet tall. So it was actually, what was interesting is at this point in time, they kind of started moving towards me. So at that point, their soft call started getting a little bit louder and turning into the gobbling sound. They started kind of puffing their feathers up, and we were in pretty close proximity to each other. So I actually, at that point, took off running, figuring that the soft sounds turning into loud gobbles meant they were coming after me and going to chomp on me for lunch, which would not be typical of turkeys, but it was a pretty unique situation I guess I had found myself in. And so consequently, I tell that story because I don't think I've ever been that close to wild turkeys since that event, and I probably should have been a little bit more thankful to being able to have that opportunity, because it was actually rather neat. And goes back just to the fact, like I was mentioning, they are pretty tall as far as they go. And so here's one of those pictures towards the bottom there of how I remember, at least visually, them puffing up and looking at me. I can't really tell you if they were males or females at that point. Like I said, it all happened so fast, but it was a neat thing to see. Now, looking at them, when they puff up and their size that I've been talking about, wild turkeys can actually fly. I've already alluded to the fact that they do achieve treetop status at some points. They do mostly get around by walking. They can also run pretty fast. When threatened, females tend to turn to flying. Males, on the other hand, will turn to running. So if you're looking at predators of wild turkeys, they include coyotes, bobcats, raccoons, great horned owls. To be perfectly honest, though, the main predator is going to be people. Life expectancy of a wild turkey for a male is about 2 years. For females, about 3 years. At sundown is when you'll typically see them fly down to the lower limbs of trees and then eventually work their way limb from limb to their higher roosting spots. They will roost individually. Most often, though, you'll see them in flocks. And they also actually, as far as talking about them moving about, they can actually swim if they need to. They tuck their wings in close, spread their tails, and use their feet to kick about. Don't know how successful they are necessarily at swimming, but apparently it's a possibility. This you're not going to be able to hear the sound on, but as far as courtship goes, the National Geographic has a pretty good video to kind of show you some of the dance maneuvers they put on. If you do go back and end up looking up this link a little bit later, it does have some pretty catchy music to go along with it. So as far as this courtship behavior goes, turkeys are pretty interesting. In April, we'll get rid of this here. In around April is when the courting males will gobble to attract females and warn other competing males. They'll display their feathers, of course, for the females by spreading their wings, lowering their wings to the ground, fanning their tail into an upright position, and erecting the feathers on breast, back, and flanks, and strut around the hen. There's non-vocal hums and kind of a chump sound that you'll also hear during this movement. Males will breed with multiple mates and form all-male flocks outside of the breeding season and actually leave the chick rearing to the females. So I've got a few pictures here we can zoom in on. As far as their nest placement, wild turkeys nest on the ground in dead leaves at the base of trees, under brush and thick shrubbery, and sometimes even in open hay fields. Out in northwest Ohio where I'm at, I'd assume that'd probably be a little bit more common than actually in some other areas, since we have a lot of that flat area that's just open and inviting for them. The females actually scratch a hollow depression in the soil that's about an inch deep, 8 to 11 inches wide, 9 to 13 inches long, and then they spend one day nesting. Nesting periods will run from April to about mid-June. Peak of hatching then occurs in mid-May to June. Here's what these little guys will look like. Predators, of course, of the nests will include raccoons, opossums, skunks, foxes, woodchucks and snakes, birds, even some of your domestic pets, and then human disturbance will also be another issue. Generally, you'll see a clutch size of 4 to 17 eggs. They measure about 2 to 3 inches in length and are usually pale or somewhat yellowish or tan, marked with reddish, brown, or pinkish spots, and they'll incubate for about 25 to 31 days. Upon hatching, the young are called poults and are well developed and covered with tawny brown, pinkish, and gray down. In just about 2 weeks' time, they're actually able to fly, and they'll travel in a family group with their mother, sometimes even combining with other family groups to form even larger flocks. Young turkeys can be accompanied by 2 or more adult females. Once you get into winter, those groups, as they begin to assemble themselves, can exceed about 200 turkeys, actually. Now, as far as turkeys and their range, specifically relating to Ohio, this is a nice map again from ODNR that shows you a bit of the range in regards to their distribution among our state. They're year-round resident. Their home range is only about 2 square miles. Where are you going to find them? If you go to the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, they'll give you a whole host of turkey observation areas. They basically correspond to some of those counties that are shaded in dark that have a high abundance of turkeys. Coshocton County at the Woodbury Wildlife Area, Williams County, actually, out towards where I'm at in one of the wildlife areas, Trumbull County, Lawrence, Grand River Wildlife Area, that's the one in Trumbull County there. 2013, like I said before at the beginning, there were some discrepancies in my population statistics, but one from 2013 estimated our population at about 180,000 turkeys. If you move outside of Ohio, they inhabit 49 states. Alaska would be the only state that you're not going to find them, as well as parts of Mexico and parts of Canada. I also have an interest in geology, so I did find it interesting that if you're looking at the geological record, if you go back 5 million years ago, in Mexico, there's actually a location where you can find the oldest turkey fossils. So if you go back to the beginning of the webinar when I was talking a little bit about some of their ID characteristics, their large size and the fact that they have compact bones, and their popularity as a dinner item lends them to having a pretty well-known fossil record compared to most other birds. Now, as far as the habitat goes, they're going to prefer a mature forest with plenty of cover. The actual background here, I think, displays that pretty well. They need to have a sufficient amount of an omnivore type diet, so forbs, grasses, and insects. If you want to break their diet down into percentages, I do also like statistics, so you'll get a couple of those, maybe more than a couple during this. About 90% of their diet is going to consist of plant material. Depending on the time of year, that plant material is, of course, going to vary. If you go to the fall and winter and early spring, they'll search woodland floors for acorns, beech nuts, hickory nuts, other seeds and berries that are growing at that point. They, in the deep snow events, will look for ferns, club mosses, things they can find on the ground there. And in early spring, they're known to dig up all sorts of plant bulbs. They're not particularly picky, so any interesting fruit, flower, tubers, wild grapes, or wild cherries and hackberries, flowering dogwood fruits in particular, even jack and the pulpit leaves, they'll kind of go for. In the late spring and summer, they'll actually strip seeds from sedges and other grasses. They also will eat salamanders, snails, ground beetles, other insects. Going back to the farm fields, grains such as from corn, soybean, buckwheat, oats, things that you generally are grown in Ohio in those fields, they'll get at those. Hens will consume about 1/3 of a pound of food daily, and adult gobblers will eat as much as 1/2 to 1 pound of food each day. If you go back to the little ones, their diet initially is going to consist of about 75% insects, and they'll make up the rest of that percentage with different grasses, seeds, and berries. Water is also going to be real important. Daily consumption is pretty important for them, so you're not going to find hens nesting more than 1/4 mile from a reliable water source. So if we move on to the how-to of when you're most likely to see a turkey, you're going to want to get up early. And that's generally when the flocks will be out foraging in some of the clearings and along roadsides where you'll get the best view of them, and along field edges, particularly along those forested edges that have nut-bearing trees. In the spring and summer, the best means for actually hearing a turkey is going to be listening for those gobbling males. They're loud, pretty loud, and the sound will carry a good distance. In general, at that point, you'll see them on the floor of the forest. So I didn't want to have a turkey presentation without looking at maybe some of the more lighthearted turkey myths and facts. For instance, how turkeys were named. Obviously, they're not from Turkey. And when looking at this, I found that we're not exactly sure how they really got their name. There's a bit of confusion on the matter, I guess you'd say. The wild turkeys that we've been talking about are, in fact, native to the United States. And one of the explanations I found in regards to how they got their name was that the British had a habit of referring to anything exotic and imported from the East as turkey, with a descriptive word there, such as, look at this turkey rug or this turkey bag. So in the 1500s, when the American turkey first arrived in Great Britain, it was referred to as turkey. Another story, though, is that the Europeans already had wild fowl that they liked to eat before Christopher Columbus ever came to the New World, and it had come from Guinea in Western Africa, the guinea fowl. It was imported to Europe by, once again, the Turkish merchants and eaten in London, so it got its nickname turkey. When British settlers got off the Mayflower in the Massachusetts Bay Colony and saw their first American woodland fowl, even though it's larger than the African guinea fowl, they decided to call it by the name they already used for the African bird. Wild forested birds like that were called turkeys at home. And third story being that the name turkey actually came from the Native Americans. And some of you may be familiar with Turkey Foot Rock here. Those of you familiar with maybe President Washington's Indian Wars of the 1790s, This rock was supposedly involved in the Battle of Fallen Timbers. Supposedly Chief Turkeyfoot of the Ottawa to try and rally the Native American Confederacy against Mr. Mad Anthony Wayne's troops at that point, and was shot from atop the rock. It's not close enough in this picture, but if you do get up to see this rock, there are kind of etchings in it that look like turkey feet. And it's still, I guess, sought after, this rock, by the Native American folks that visit as a place of remembrance. It's more of a nice story, a nice myth that this rock was actually there at the battle. Probably actually wasn't there. But as far as Native Americans naming the turkey, when they called the bird actually furkey, which sounds like turkey, and then when you couple that with the sound they make when they're afraid, which sounds a little bit like a turk, 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 you get the name turkey there. Don't know how many of you have heard of there being problems with turkeys drowning when they look up and it's raining. It's a common urban legend that when turkeys stare up into the sky, the water will go down their throats, and that they're not real intelligent, so instead of putting their head down, they continue to look up and will eventually drown. Some of the things that I think probably perpetuate this legend would include the fact that because turkeys' physical characteristics, the fact that they look a little bit silly, especially when they're moving around, cause people to automatically assume that they're not real intelligent. Especially if you start to look at the domesticated turkeys, which sometimes is what people are more familiar with. They're, of course, bred to be real heavy, meaty birds, which cause them to look even sillier, especially when they try to run and try to fly, although for the most part they're not going to be able to take off and fly a great deal. But most importantly, the takeaway there as far as rain goes is that that is a myth. Turkeys have not been known to drown in the rain. You may be familiar then with Mr. Benjamin Franklin and the fact that in his infinite wisdom and wit, he wanted the national bird to be the turkey instead of the bald eagle. The United States Diplomacy Center has informed us that this actually is a falsification. However, upon further investigation, not entirely. What he did was he actually, if you look up on the Franklin Institute more about this, he mentions, or rather they mentioned, that he ended up writing a letter to his daughter that had a little bit to do with his selected design of the turkey. So I'll read you a little bit of that letter. You can make your own determination as to how he felt about the bald eagle being a national symbol versus the turkey. So he says, "For my own part, I wish the bald eagle had not been chosen the representative of our country. He is a bird of bad moral character. He does not get his living honestly. You may have seen him perched on some dead tree near the river, where, too lazy to fish for himself, he watches the labor of the fishing hawk. And when that diligent bird has at length taken a fish, and is bearing it to his nest for the support of his mate and young ones, the bald eagle pursues him and takes it from him. With all this injustice, he is never in good case, but like those among men who live by sharpening and robbing, he is generally poor and often very lousy. Besides, he is a rank coward. The little kingbird, not bigger than a sparrow, attacks him boldly and drives him out of the district. He is therefore by no means a proper emblem for the brave and honest Cincinnati of America, who has driven all the kingbirds from our country. I am on this account not displeased that the figure is known as a bald eagle, but looks more like a turkey. For the truth of the turkey is, in comparison, a much more respectable bird, and withal a true original native of America. He is besides, though a little vain and silly, a bird of courage, and would not hesitate to attack a grenadier of British guards who should presume to invade his farmyard with a red coat on." So moving on from a little bit more of the lightheartedness into some more of those statistics that I mentioned I liked. There's actually a few surveys that are done to, so to speak, keep an eye on the population of the wild turkey in Ohio. So there's roadside gobbling counts and then the cooperative turkey observation reports. And I can zoom in a little bit more on some of these. The gobbling counts are an annual survey of the breeding abundance of the turkey throughout Ohio. So essentially, the routes consist of 10 listening stops. They're spaced about half a mile apart, and the routes are repeated on 2 non-consecutive days, a half hour before and an hour after sunrise. Observers record the turkeys that are heard as well as seen, and the total number of gobbles heard during a 4-minute listening period at each stop. So over the course of 1994 up to 2013, this gives you a little view on how that survey's going. They don't conduct it during heavy rain or when winds are exceeding 8 miles per hour. And then the other one I have here is the turkey summer population table, which is showing you the results of the cooperative turkey observation reports. And since 1962, actually, wild turkey observation cards have been distributed by the Division of Wildlife. They're personnel, park rangers, foresters, and other interested individuals that frequent Ohio's turkey range. And the reports are then summarized by county and township observation date, recording the turkey sex and age. And the summary is able to provide an annual index then of their reproductive success. As far as hunting goes, if you look at the state of Ohio, this gives you the amount of turkeys that were actually harvested in 2015 by county, and then how that's changed from 2014 to 2015 by county. Since 1966, Ohio's used a mandatory registration system to determine the hunter harvest, and they have trekking stations are established in each county, so the hunters are required by law to register their bird by 2 p.m. on the day that it's harvested. And the check station data then provides a pretty good amount of information as to the total harvest by county. And then this data is used to determine the distribution, abundance, and evaluate the success of our stocking efforts and hunting regulations, and they use that as a basis for future hunting seasons and regulations. So as I know not everybody's as interested in statistics as I am, here's a little bit more of the, I guess, less seriousness side of turkeys. As far as domesticated turkeys versus wild turkeys, I think I've alluded a little bit to some of this, but domesticated turkeys obviously weigh about twice as much as the wild turkeys. They're going to have a more significant amount of breast meat. Obviously, that'll be helpful at your Thanksgiving feast there. Because of their size, domesticated turkeys cannot fly and are poor runners. However, I have read that they can fly to an extent, so depending on which source you're looking at there. Wild turkeys are sleeker, allowing them to fly and run quite well. Domesticated turkeys are noisier than their wild counterparts. Loud vocalizations, obviously, on the part of wild turkeys are going to attract more predators. Our domesticated friends don't have much to worry about that, especially since, not by their choice, they're going to end up probably on somebody's plate. And many of the domestic turkeys are bred with white feathers. That's kind of the color you associate with them. There are some that are brown, and at the very end of the slides here, I'll show you some other ones that are even more interesting color. I did have on here a picture of a good book, the Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold. And coming from the discussion there on hunting regulations and such, I do always like to plug Mr. Leopold because he's a good example of somebody who's a hunter but recognizes the understands, I guess, the balance of hunting and sustaining wildlife to its true potential. He's known as the father of wildlife conservation. And the turkey hunt in the National Forest and the Good Oak are two different writings that he has where he mentions the wild turkey. And the Good Oak is a real good one to read. You can just Google search that and it'll come up. The premise for that is he's sawing through an oak tree that's fallen on his property and looking at the rings in there and mentioning the different things that happened during the life of this tree, one being the extirpation of wild turkeys at one point. So that's a good read there. Just a few other, though, added kind of interesting things to make note of. This is all from motherjones.com, but I thought they had some interesting graphics there. So this compares size-wise the factory farmed turkeys to the wild turkeys, both the toms, which are the males, and the females, the hens. So average lifespan obviously is going to be one of those variables, and then it gives you a pretty good sense of exactly how much bigger they are. Also, just kind of fun facts, Big Bird's costume is made of 4,000 feathers that are from the rear end of a turkey. Where do most turkey feathers and skin end up? In the compost. But they're also used for pillows, belts, and even cowboy jeans, or boots rather. Average weight of a turkey by year. These are the domestic turkeys we're looking at. So in 1965, your turkey dinner was about 18 pounds, and in 2012, about 30 pounds would be the average weight there. Americans throw away more than a third of all the edible turkey meat every year. So that's a friendly reminder for folks as they're eating their turkeys this year to try and have as little food waste as possible. 46 million turkeys, though, are going to be enjoyed this Thanksgiving, or at least that's the estimate. The rest of the year, about 2 million turkeys per day are either eaten or exported. Typical lifetime consumption for turkeys versus chickens, 36.4 gallons for your turkey compared to 22 gallons for the chicken, and 75 to 80 pounds of feed for the turkey versus 11 pounds for a chicken. This is actually kind of a neat activity. You could even do at Thanksgiving with the kids, or if you're one of those folks that does some interpretation or education, they of course make turkey calls for hunters. Hunting turkeys is a pretty difficult task actually, because they have really keen eyesight and of course will run when startled with just a little bit of noise. But you can also actually make your own turkey call by punching a small hole in the bottom of a cup, cutting a piece of yarn about 2 feet long, threading the yarn then through the bottom of the cup there. You'll tie a bead on the end of it so that way the end of the yarn is going to stay on the outside of the cup. And then to get your turkey sound, you're going to take a small sponge, moisten that, and grip the cup with one hand, use your other to squeeze the wet sponge down the length of the yarn, pull tight, and it makes a bit of a squawking sound. It's not terribly loud. I was going to try and play one for you on this webinar, but I don't think it would have come through as well as I would have hoped. As promised, these are some typical domesticated birds. This was actually just on the Today Show. It came across my Facebook feed, actually. These very colorful turkeys on a Connecticut farm. And they're not what I would generally think of when thinking of what a domesticated turkey looks like, but they sure are pretty. And more than likely pretty tasty, too, once they make their final route to the dinner table for you. But that's about all I have as far as a pictorial view on the wild turkeys. So I guess at this point we can entertain any questions that might be around.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. Those turkeys are really something, although they remind me more of Easter, I'd say, than of Thanksgiving. With those.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But if anyone out there has any questions, please go ahead and enter those in your chat box now, and I will address them to our speaker. But in the meantime, I'm married to a turkey hunter, so I'm not a hunter myself, but I've gone out many times with him in the morning, and it's amazing the way that hunters kind of have to learn so much of this biology just to be able to find the birds. But the vocalizations of both the males and females is really, really fascinating. So we have our first question, and Marianne is wondering if females also fan out their tail feathers like the males do.
They can. There's not as much of a reason, I guess, for them to do it, but I haven't seen anything. I guess I didn't. It was more specified to gobblers when I was looking at things, but as far as, you know, as far as their physical characteristics and how they look, there's no reason that they can't do that. But as far as behavioral characteristics, I guess they don't really have a good reason to do it.
Yeah, and for anyone who has never seen a wild turkey strut and in the wild, it's really something else. I'm not one that likes to wake up early, but it's definitely worth getting out there early and staking out your spot and watching the male strut around. It's amazing how quickly they actually will fill out to their full strut, from kind of a sleek look up to this puffed sort of, not as amazing as this pink puffed turkey we have here, but as puffed up as they get very quickly. So I definitely encourage you to go out and see that in the spring if you've never seen it. Do we have any other questions before we wrap up today? Again, today's presentation was recorded and will be archived on our website by the end of this week, and I will be sending out an email to everyone with the link so that you can view the presentation and share that with anyone that you think might be interested that wasn't able to make it today. Well, thank you again, Jennifer. I really enjoyed your presentation, and I hope everyone else did as well. And oh, got a question here right before we go. How do we do these colors here on this turkey? How is that done? Do you know?
You know, in the article, he said he wouldn't give away his secret.
Oh.
But if so, I don't really know.
That'll be a mystery
but
then.
It's not something that they're fed.
Right.
So yeah, and yeah, if you Google it, you can pull up the whole article there. But yeah, he wouldn't give away how the colors were done. But I guess this is a yearly thing there, and it attracts. There's also some other pictures on the website of some kids, you know, staring in awe at these turkeys and their bright colors.
I had a friend who did research on Canada geese, and she would color the nest, the hatchlings in the nest, because once they had feathers and the down, they could be colored like this, and then she could tell them apart rather than because they were too young to be banded. So it might be a technique that's out there that if you're interested, you can look into it.
Yeah, it certainly could be.
All right, well, we're out of time. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending, and thank you again, Jennifer, for the presentation.
Certainly, thanks for having me.